Yo, what is up, guys? Hollow Nasty here, and this week, I am joined by Matthew Kite.
Hey guys, back again. Playoffs just around the corner, so we're really getting to kind of the meat of the season. It's just crazy kind of how impactful the games were this week for kind of playoffs and stuff. So it's going to be a great week for power rankings. I hope you guys are ready.
Yeah, it's been close for a few weeks now. Week 9. Yeah, it's still just as close. So let's dive right into it. At number 16, we have Ace.
All right, 16 Ace. Ace loves bringing kind of interesting things to try to work around with his Empoleon. Hallu says this basically every other week that he really likes to kind of put that focus on the Empoleon, getting it kind of the truest potential that it can. And this week we see that he ends up bringing Scar, which I like. I think it's good. And to a certain extent, I guess it kind of did its job in a sense that it weakened the Altaria, which he lost to like 6-0 otherwise anyways. But I feel like that was a pretty steep cost as the Empoleon just had such a good matchup, especially the Scarf variant that he brought, especially like we said, because of how well he likes to work with that Empoleon. Overall, though, the problem Ace faced this game was a structural one, not necessarily a fault of how he played so much, although, like that being said, there certainly were several very questionable turns, but like the focus, I think, of the brunt of all the problems, I think, was kind of a structural one. What I'm getting at right here is that he had to deal with kind of threats upon threats here this game, and there was realistically only so much he could do against the Lycanroc after the Seismitoad got killed by the Weavile. And sure, we can talk about crits or whatever, but I mean, it still would have ended up dying to the Weavile and stuff. Not only that, but the Weavile itself, after the Seismitoad went down, as like obviously we know the Empoleon went down turn 2 as well, but after those two Pokemon went down, how is he really stopping the Weavile either? So unfortunately, Ace is going to be the bottom of our list here with a 3-6 rating.
Yeah, a 3-6 record. It's definitely tough at Week 9 coming into the season because there's 4 3-6 teams. He needs to win next week, or he's viable to face relegation. So from this week, definitely looked like Ace had some more pressure. Taking Rob to a close game. Next week he has Merc, also a good opponent, but I want to see him keep the pressure up, pressure with other things that aren't the Empoleon, and then hopefully take away the win and avoid relegation. So that being said, at number 15, moved up one, we have Moxie and Fername.
All right, so Moxie Blake, another person who has kind of have to worry about relegation. Now, this is interesting. I told this story to Hallu. It might not be appropriate, but I thought I'd try to cover it really, really quickly. I started watching this replay without knowing what the answer was, and I started making my notes on this battle under the assumption that Moxie had lost, based on that, like the first, I don't know, 5 turns, the first like few turns of the game. I was under the assumption that Moxie lost very decisively. So, needless to say, I got to the end of the battle, and I had to delete a lot of my notes and restructure a lot of things. But Blake started off this game very questionably, as I mentioned. But what we see is that he bended, but he didn't break. And he very quickly starts to turn things around. And his team, at first glance, looks extremely passive, and that's kind of where my issues were when I first saw the team. And even to be honest, even after I saw the results of this game, I still feel like he was a little bit more passive than he would have preferred. We've seen a lot of really good things out of Blake at the beginning of the season, and I think it's obvious that he always performs much better when he's trying to play around with offense, for the simple reason that he's just so much more comfortable at that role, and his draft functions a lot more comfortably when it's built as such. That being said, I was pleasantly surprised this game because we see, even though Blake brought what could have potentially looked to be very passive, very exploitable defensive backbone with mons like Mew and Arcanine, it's quickly apparent that these are no ordinary sets. We have Swords Dance Mew, Scarf Arcanine. This is the Blake that we know and love. And like I said, I kind of feel that the Wigglytuff was very out of place right here. It kind of, in my opinion, stuck out like a sore thumb. I mean, I get what it's kind of trying to do, but realistically, it didn't do what he was trying to do this game at all. It just died. It really stuck out like a sore thumb right here. And obviously, I didn't like seeing his water resist disappear from the screen as early as it did. But at the end of the day, things really just came together for him, and he pulled it forward, and he did what he did. With some very interesting things that wasn't really expected by me. So moving up right here from number 16, Blake's going to be number 15 with a 3-6 record as well.
Right, and for a lot of people, I've been repeating a lot of things throughout the season, but I feel like this game, Moxie actually did something different. While he did get good value out of his Zygarde 10%, like I've been saying, I feel like he was also able to offensively pressure with the Mew, with the Mega Pidgeot, and etc. And we see when he was able to mix up pressure, he was able to take down Pokemon, the Arcanine, the Scarf Arcanine picking up a needed kill. We see when he's able to differentiate the pressure that he's applying through different Pokemon, it's much more effective. He's able to win games with it. So I hope he keeps up this strategy going into Week 10. He needs a win to avoid relegation. That's just the nature of being 3-6 currently in Week 9 when there's 4 teams 3-6. So I was hoping to keep up this play, keep up this aggressive play through different Pokemon, not just through one Pokemon, and pick up a win against Cheese Boy. So that being said, at number 14 we have Adam.
All right, so speaking of questionable beginnings with Adam, Adam does not have the Cinderella story that we do have out of Blake right here. So, as I mentioned, very questionable beginning for Adam. I think this is down to just not giving certain mons respect and not having a lot of foresight for what could happen in the future turns. And I'm going to talk about that. So, obviously, I'm kind of alluding here with the Clefable, but the other really big thing here was how he let his Klefki get down. Obviously, the crit on the Klefki was pretty annoying for him, and I think getting the crit made him less inclined to actually try to save his Klefki later on, because I think if he hadn't have gotten crit, he maybe would have saved it because it would have been at a higher health and he would have had put a little bit more value in that Mon in particular. But ultimately, I think the keys going down was the beginning of the end for him. He had a few opportunities, I think, to kind of try to turn the game around. Maybe if he'd called a few more of the Mana Buzz switches on his Lopunny, a little bit better or something like that. But anyways, that's the game. I can't fault him too hard for an L versus Gypsy, but he is not going to be going above number 14, even though he's just got a 3-6 record as well.
Right, and as I said a few times already, a bunch of 3-6 records. Adam is also looking to pick up a win against David next week to avoid relegation. And while Week 9 was a tough week, we had a versus Gypsy King, who's really been dominant this season with his draft. And he did play him close, a lot closer than most. I'll give Adams props for that. He did play Gypsy to a closer game than a lot of people so far of this season, and his showing there didn't look as bad as others. He's still out of playoffs. He's still got to win next week. That's going to be Adam's season on a wrap. So at number 13, we have Zazo.
All right, Zazo. This is a really interesting game, I think. I actually really, really like what I saw. I think this is a very interesting spectator point of view, an interesting game for the spectator point of view, because we really see the effects of having a T-Tar just in the back versus a Victini. Obviously, Victini, when you can have stuff like drops. I think he had Blue Flare, so I guess that doesn't matter, but it's very, very interesting seeing the effects of having a Tyranitar in the back and how it forces plays. The Victini goes for U-turn on the Bronzong instead of attacking into it, and he ends up losing his Tornadus. Like his opponent ends up losing his Tornadus because of that, which is really, really cool. This was also really cool because we see that later he's actually able to bluff the Heat Proof, which is fantastic. So it was kind of a win-win scenario, obviously, in terms of what the T-Tar are doing and what the Bronzong do. It's kind of a win-win scenario, which I really, really like. And that's just kind of why I love Bronzong in the format. You have these two fantastic abilities. Heat Proof maybe not as fantastic, but fantastic in terms of team building potential. Now, as with most games, I've got a lot of questions here. I don't really know why he didn't spam rocks on the Tornadus, although I guess it was just a read that went wrong. I don't know why he sacks Laddie to the Mamoswine when he did have Levitate Bronzong, although, again, I can kind of get that he was trying to bluff the Heat Proof. Or maybe he was just trying to make some play where he was assuming Mammo was going to go for knockoff to try to cover both, but obviously that's not going to do very much damage to the Mega Laddie. So I don't totally agree with that either, but I do find it really cool when... I find it really cool whenever we get to see kind of sand support benefit Sweeper other than Excadrill. I love seeing stuff like Mega Garchomp benefit from stuff like that, but obviously in this game we get to see that Excadrill benefit from it. And there's just something so satisfying about watching Dugtrio get those boosted kills. I love this game. Zazo going to be the last person here with a 3-6 record.
Right, and I think Zazo might have been the only person with 3... No, that's not true. I take it all back. I didn't say anything. But I do want to shout out Carney Hobo for this amazing Alolan Dugtrio find, because it's so far he used it amazingly. Zazo used it amazingly. And it's putting out a lot of pressure and picking up a lot of kills. So Zazo, he joined a week or two ago. I can't remember exactly, but he joined about a week or two ago, picking up wins. I said when I talked about Zazo and I've talked about Chris that he was going to pick up wins to push the pack. That's what we've seen from him. So we'd like to see him pick up a win next week and maintain his spot for Season 9 of the NPL Majors. So that being said, about Zazo, at number 12, we have Danza.
All right, so Danza, Crobat for the win. I'm a pretty big advocate for him. I think he's underrated. I wouldn't say he's like a top contender, but I do think he's kind of underrated. But I feel like this game disappointed me, and I feel like there's been getting more and more games from Crobat that have disappointed me. I'm not going to change my stance on him because I do still like him, but this game really surprised me because Crobat seemed, to me at the beginning of the game, it seemed to me like he had team matchup in the bag. I don't like how he played around or prepped around the Mega Lati per se. Lati is just one of those mons where you do have to dedicate time in the team builder, not just time, but you have to dedicate a lot of stuff in the team builder to deal with this mon. And it seemed like his best, his first, and potentially his only response to Mega Lati was Ice Shard. If that's his only response, I'm a little bit worried right there, especially when you're playing against a Bronzong. So a little bit concerned there. The other thing, and this is a trend that I have noticed in several of Crobat's games, and it always irks me a little bit, is how he works around with defog. Crobat always seems to struggle with defogging, and you brought Torn as defogger, which I don't disagree with, but you can generally, like, here's the thing, you can kind of generally figure out what the defogger is going to be, what the rocker is going to be, and Torn has the tool to be kind of built to be able to beat a Bronzong. We know after the game, obviously, that's not heat-proof, so maybe he was afraid of going for stuff like Heat Wave on it for that reason, but you can build your Tornadus to be able to specifically kill Bronzongs and prevent hazards, or kill Bronzongs defog later. But instead, once again, we see him bring triple Rock Weeks, and he just can't keep the field clear. So, like I said, we found out it's not heat-proof, but I don't know why we never saw any Heat Waves coming out, or even any knockoffs, anything along the lines of that. The second thing, and this isn't as big because rocks were up, and he didn't get rid of them, but the second he Mega Evolves the Gyarados, he lost to the Dugtrio. I mean, that's obvious enough if you've seen the battle. Like I said, he probably would have lost anyways, even if he didn't Mega Evolve, because rocks were up, and that's 25%. That's a lot of damage. But this, like I said, this still goes back to focusing on hazards and setting your priorities straight. If your Gyarados is losing to a ground type because you have to Mega Evolve because of I think I'm retarded. I think there's a Mega Evolve rule, isn't there? I think I'm actually just retarded. Hopefully Hallu can edit that out, because I think I'm actually retarded. I've been in way too many leagues where there's not a Mega first turn rule. So take out everything I said about Gyarados.
I don't know. Truth be told, I don't know if that's going to be taken out. But
Okay.
I can't confirm that there is a first turn Mega rule.
Oh my god, I'm so dumb. I've been in so many leagues where that's rule. But okay, everything I said about Tornadus, everything I said about the introduction to this, I stand by, but what I said about Gyarados is just stupid. Anyways, still a very convincing loss, and Crobat is going to have a 4-3 record.
Okay, yeah, so what I've been saying about Crobat so far this season, and then we saw, I guess, again this week, was that he really wasn't winning against people higher than him on the power rankings. Relative to the power rankings, people that were above him, he was losing to. People that were below him, he was beating. And that was mainly because, I guess, I don't know what to say about that, but it's not quite happening here, but you get the general idea. So, if he wins Week 10, I don't know if he can make playoffs at this point. I think his differential might be too bad. But yeah, that was the end of the season. He had a fine season, great return. It was very fun watching him this season. I guess we'll continue with our recap on Week 10, but that's all I have to say about Danza right now. Average season, I don't think he can be relegated. I don't think he can make playoffs. So yeah, that was Danza's season. At number 11, we have Chris.
Alright, so we're at Chris. I'm going to try to speed things up a little bit because I wasted way too much time in that last one. Chris really, he just had the prep to answer everything Greg kind of threw at him, which I definitely liked. He had that Hibanberry, Zygarde, and he had the Miltank. I think the Miltank was actually a very smart bring to prevent that Zard from getting out of hand. I don't know why he was really so willing to let his Scizor get burned in the first place on turn 1, but regardless, I mean, I guess potentially maybe he had Heal Bell on his Miltank in the back, but regardless, what's cool is that Chris really likes to kind of stretch the limits of his draft. I really like that about him. I really like that about the draft. And I like to think of him as kind of one of the more unpredictable players in this season, as you never really know what he's going to bring, and you always seem to over-prep for something that he doesn't actually bring, which is really, really interesting factor of his drafts. And I have to kind of... that has to kind of impact the team-building phase in a really cool aspect. I really like how it impacts how your opponents play right before the game starts. Very, very cool stuff. Chris likes to bring non-standard variations of Ninetales, and I love that. Ninetales, for me, When it first came out, I was like, hey, this is a pretty cool mod. I like it. But now I hate the mod. Or at least I did before before I started seeing Chris play. But I hated it because it kind of has fallen into the curse of repetition in the sense that a lot of people draft this mod and use it as a suicide screens lead and nothing else. And it kind of annoys me in the same sense that people draft Mew and only use it as a defog or something like that. Like, that's got to be one of my biggest pet peeves, like, ever in terms of draft. But we've seen that Chris likes to bring all these different kind of offensive options that are kind of so often overlooked. I really like that about him. I really like Ninetales not being a suicide lead that just dies and does nothing else but set up fail. So, cool stuff right there. Chris is also going to be sitting here at a 4-5 record.
Right. When Chris first joined, I said he was going to be pushing the bottom of the pack. He's going to be upping the wins for relegation and really just probably even getting out of relegation zone. And we see him now 4-5 week 9. His differential is pretty decent. Picks up a win week 10. He could definitely make playoffs. So definitely all came true, as you said. As Matthew's been saying, he's been in the beginning he struggled to find his team, but now he found it. He's bringing creative sets that are able to work. He's able to pressure his opponents and pick up wins. So yeah, pretty good season coming out from Chris, taking over a team that I think was 1-3 at the time, now being 4-5. Definitely something to be proud of. Definitely looking to make playoffs, and that's why we have him at number 11. So at number 10, we have Regulator.
All right, so Greg is one of those dudes who kind of flip-flops from winning and losing and winning. Not really back and forth, but he goes on, I guess, kind of, he wins a lot, then he loses a lot. But he's always kind of toting the line where it's very, very close in terms of whether he's going to win or not. But there were just so many problematic turns here for Greg. And every time he tried to kind of turn the game in his favor, something he didn't expect happens. And we see this when he attacks with Lando into the Ninetales. And I can kind of forgive this, I guess, because realistically, a perfectly played Ninetales against his team would have no answer. If he switched in Scissor on HP Fire, if he switched on Veil or something like that, he would be in a pretty bad situation as well. So I can kind of forgive that, I guess. We see this again when he Dragon Claws into the Zygarde, and we have a Hiban Berry right there. We see this being nasty plots in the Ninetales switching in. All of these, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying these are like so obvious, why didn't you call them? These are good plays that his opponents were making, don't get me wrong. But in the end, he just ends up losing so much momentum. And every time he has a lot of trouble regaining it. Now, as with all games that Greg has, Croak had some pretty good potential to win. I think every game Greg has played, Croak has had potential to win, especially with kind of how low Zygarde got, plus the fact they actually outsped the Zygarde, which is pretty cool. But he just had trouble kind of forcing open those opportunities. And I think this is something we see a lot with Greg. He gets kind of too tunnel visioned with trying to win with one specific mon, trying to buckle down on one specific strategy and not being really flexible, not looking at what his other options are. And he kind of wastes resources because of that. I think he plays some things pretty haphazardly with mons that otherwise could have been kind of kept a little bit more healthy, stuff like that. He mentioned as well on how Scissor got really, really weakened, and he was a little bit concerned with how weakened Scissor got. I think that's another example right there. But Greg, like I said, he's toting the line. Things could go either way with Greg. He can win, he can lose, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. But Greg is going to be at number 10 with a 4-5 record.
Right, and Greg was someone who had an explosive start to the season with I believe 3-1 start to the season, and now sitting at 4-5. As we said, he definitely goes either way. It's very hard to get a read on Greg and how he's going to perform, because he could either turn up and make a run all the way through playoffs, be the next NPL champion, or he could just lose week 10 and not even make playoffs. So very hard to get a good accurate read onto Greg, because you never know what form he's going to show up in. He could show up like somebody on the bottom and try to tunnel vision through one Pokemon, and if that Pokemon doesn't work out, then he has no pressure at all and loses the game. Or he could show up like Gypsy, and all 6 of your Pokemon are going to be absolute terrors, and you just don't know how to deal with it. So I'm very excited to watch Greg for the rest of the season. I hope his better form shows up and he's able to keep the pressure up, because pressure is a common theme that I've talked about throughout everybody, and really pressure his opponents, and win games in a decisive fashion like he once did, and not get stuck on just one Pokemon, one threat that he wants to sweep with, because something like the Toxicroak, where against Rob it was really cool, against this game it didn't work out. So I definitely want to see him keep versatility. That being said, at number 9 we have David.
All right, so David, there's a few things with David, I guess. I find I wouldn't really say they're over-predicts that he does, but I find he doesn't focus on what's in front of him some of the times, and some of the times he ends up paying for stuff like that. And I guess sometimes he just doesn't give things as much respect as they really need. I think he really flustered versus the Mew, as well as, like I said, he didn't really respect the Zygarde in front of him, give it the respect that it really needed this game, as realistically, he just kind of sacked Mons when he didn't really need to, versus both these Mons several times, I think. I think Moxie kind of lucked out in the sense that he didn't face Ice Shard on the Donphan. I think that's another bit of an issue with David. I find his prep is sometimes lacking, sometimes a little bit lackluster in that sense. But I guess in the team building phase, Magic kind of decided to accept this gambit where I'll be a little bit weaker to the likes of Zygarde. And ultimately that gambit did not pay off for him. And he ended up being, he had a pretty major weakness on his team, a pretty major chink in his armor right there. And that was pretty easily exploited. At the end of the day, though, it doesn't really matter what I say because this truly was a pretty close match. If one, maybe two turns had went differently, maybe we saw Cresselia Ice Beam twice. That's another thing about, like you mentioned, attacking what's in front of him sometimes. Maybe we saw him Ice Beam twice. Maybe if we saw Dark Pulse flinch. Maybe if we did see an Ice Shard on that Donphan. Honestly, this match had a lot of opportunities to go either way. So can't really talk down on David. He's a solid player. A good game to both, and he's going to be coming out of here with a 4-5 record.
Right, and David's really been turning up the past few weeks, so definitely unfortunate to see him take a loss this week. As he would have had 3 straight games, going from Maddie to Merc, and then losing to Blake. So that almost goes along with the meme that I was saying, that if you're good, then you're going to lose to David. Not saying Blake's not good, but it's just the way it is. It seems like his predictions are just weird, and if you want to, I'll put it like this: his predictions make a lot of sense. They're able to catch people, Merc, Maddie, but Blake just played way too aggressive for David to be able to predict. So I want to see him understand his opponent a little more when he's making his predictions. When you're playing against someone like Blake, you need to be wary of the really aggressive predictions that he's going to punish you if you try to make an over-predict. And you can't just use the same style that you would use against the Mercs or the Maddies because they just have a different style of playing. So that's definitely what I want to see from David. I think if he makes playoffs, he'll definitely have a good run. With that being said, at number 8, we have Dallas.
All right, so this is the first time I get to comment on Dallas's gameplay since he's joined the season. Coming off of a rough loss from Greg, I didn't really know what to expect out of him. I honestly think it would be difficult for really anybody to take over Trev's team because Trev built this very niche draft, and it really takes a certain state of mind to really, I guess, unlock the potential of the draft in the same way that Trev did, because we do see Trev get a pretty decent amount of value out of the draft that he did have. So it's not as if it's a completely useless draft because he has been able to make it work several times. But yeah, for sure. I think it's something that is going to be difficult to kind of get used to, if that makes any sense. We do see a lot of really cool stuff right here, which is to be, I guess, expected with the draft he has. And he probably played as well as he could have, I guess, around the Meloetta, all things considered. Honestly, I don't have a lot to say right here because it wasn't really too crazy of a game. He came out of this game shakily, I think, but it was a victory nonetheless, so I can't knock it. So Dallas, number 8 with a 4-5 record.
Right, and he played Aster this week, which is definitely a big deal. So far, he's the second person on the season to beat Aster. So that's definitely a big deal. Very impressive coming out from Dallas. With that being said, this was the second game played. I don't know if he's eligible for playoffs, and he's definitely, I think, out of relegation zone. So right now, I think he's just playing to determine this stuff for other people. And if he keeps playing like this, he might be handing out an L for week. He might be handing out an L for week 10. Very impressive when you're able to take down Aster in the NPL this season, who's been really dominant so far throughout. So that being said, at number 7 we have Bird.
All right, so interesting game right here. I'm definitely going to go very in-depth to the actual game, but Verd really struggles with the trick room here. And we see his only real way of kind of stopping the Mimikyu was kind of sacking Mons to Life Orb Recoil, which kind of makes you think if he had gotten a few more Bullet Seed hits, maybe he would have had a little bit of a better time. But honestly, being realistic here, I think this game can really be put down to kind of Verd was taken by surprise, which makes a lot of sense because you don't see this type of strategy very, very often. As I kind of mentioned, I can definitely respect the prep he brought for the Mimikyu with the Bullet Seed. I think that was really, really cool. I like that a lot. But a lot of theoretical prep goes completely out the window when you rely on speed tiers to kind of check certain mons. And then the speed gets flipped on their heads. Things go just out the window at that point. So he was doing really well in the early game, honestly, all things considered, but things took a turn from the worse when Necrozma went down. And honestly, though, Nidoking is just one of those mons that are just such a bitch to deal with. Like, you see, sometimes you might have to invest a lot of resources into checking the specially offensive variant, only to get blown back by a physical variant. So, and Nidoking is just one of those mons. Unpredictability is its name. And like I said, when you prep in a way where your ways of checking Nidoking, Mawile, are to outspeed it, then it becomes very, very difficult to, when you start seeing them under Trick Room, especially there are a lot of other Pokemons as well, like Delmai's under Trick Room. That was a very difficult mon to deal with. So honestly, I don't think this is, oh, Verd played bad, or oh, Verd prepped bad. I don't think that. I do think that he was taken by surprise by this. I don't think he was in the team builder saying, okay, how can I deal with Trick Room? So I think that's basically the case right here. Trick Room won't work every week, but it certainly did work this week. So Verd, unfortunately, going to be here with a 4-5 record as well.
Right. So far in the season, Verd has been doing pretty decent, been able to put away a lot of opponents, and I still think he's in a good position for playoffs. He definitely needs to pick up that Week 10 win. So a Week 9 loss against Maddie, a very close game, is not that bad for a season. His differential's not that impacted, and Maddie's a definitely a formidable opponent. So definitely Week 10 when he plays Zazo, definitely want to see him pick up a win. Definitely want to see him make playoffs. Definitely want to see him see what he can do in playoffs. Um, that's all I have to say about Verd. So at number 6 we have Cheese.
All right, so who remembers when Cheese was close to the bottom of the power rankings for the longest time? My man is making the comeback of the season. I'm really interested in seeing just how far he's going to go with that. So we get to see the classic Cheese strat, the classic Aaron Cheese strat again, much to my chagrin. But hey, you know what? It almost worked, and it almost worked against Merc. So that's good enough for me, I think. As much as I dislike the idea of it, it was certainly pretty fun to watch this time, honestly. And it's fun to see that the strat is still able to kind of get kills and value where going into this game you kind of might assume that it wouldn't based on kind of team matchup. A few more turns of sand, or if for some reason Merc hadn't brought reversal, and sweeping with the last resort dog would have been a very real possibility. And to touch on that for a second, if I'm being real, I think there definitely was a way he could have won right here if he played maybe a little bit better around sand turns or worked with grassy terrain maybe to reduce the earthquake damage on the Gigalith or something like that. But ultimately, he did kind of come up flat in this sense. Close game, don't get me wrong. Certainly much closer than the Aaron squad, in my opinion, has any right to get, but close nonetheless. So Cheese, surprising everyone, from the bottom of the power rankings up to number 6 with a 4-5 record.
Right, and after he lost to Gypsy King, in Week 5, I told y'all that he was going to be winning games, and now here he's at 4-5 record, highest differential out of all the 4 and 5 teams. Definitely looking to make playoffs. So I definitely want to see Cheese win Week 10, make my predictions from Week 5 come true, and make playoffs. So that's all I have to say about Cheese. I'm going to use his success to brag about myself and my fucking profitabilities. That's where we're at right now. So definitely impressive play out of Cheese. Unfortunately, couldn't pick up Merc. Maybe he'll get a rematch in playoffs. But that being said, at number 5, now we have Merc.
All right, so I'm not going to linger on the fear strategy game any longer than we need to. So let's quickly talk about this. Sure, it really helps that half his team was immune to sand damage, and this was pretty big because of how hard kind of Cheese did commit to the Aeron. He did try to commit to that defog. He even tried to commit with the grassy train to negate rocks damage if that was the thing anyways. But really the major factor of this game was that Doug trio and everything he kind of did to support the Doug trio. We saw a lot of really interesting things, and I'm glad we get to see the eject button a little more. That's not an uncommon thing, so I'm not like pointing out, hey, look how cool this is. But yeah, it's a good thing, and it gives it the support that it needed. Again, though, this game was it was a little bit too close to comfort for me, in my opinion, but a win is a win, and I can't discredit that. So Merc, first person on the list, in the top 5, number 5 with 5 wins.
Right. So last week Merc said that he can only win with hacks and only loses because of hacks. But this week was definitely a very solid week from Merc. I definitely liked his Doug trio play. I think a lot of weeks he's played solid, other weeks he hasn't. But I hope he really finds his prep that fits his style, whether it be through this Doug trio. And I hope he plays games where he doesn't sack Keytrain like he did in the beginning of the season. I don't have too much on Merc because he won. It's definitely easy to critique when someone loses. Um, but every time you see a Frogadier and you pick up a W, that's pretty solid, pretty interesting. So I definitely like how he had offensive pressure, especially with the Doug Trio. Hope he keeps up the offensive pressure because I think when he plays offensively, um, he definitely control the game and pick up wins. So that being said, at number 4 we have Maddie.
All right, so Maddie, I mean, I start off a lot of analysis, but Maddie brought a really interesting team. I love this right here, and I'm probably going to spend a lot of time on this analysis because, I really loved it. One of the most interesting teams he's brought this season, and honestly, Maddie brings interesting teams every week, so that's kind of saying something. This is something that I think would probably even make Trev proud. We got Life Orb Lapras, Physical Needle King, a double Trick Room, not just double Trick Room, but Z Trick Room, to bypass a potential taunt Gengar, which we didn't see, but whatever. Easily replay of the week for me. I mentioned way back in the day in one of Greg's games that I love seeing people bring dedicated Trick Room. And the reason I love it is because it's just so hard to fit those capabilities onto a draft without falling into the trap of being a quote-unquote Trick Room draft. And there's nothing worse than being a dedicated Trick Room draft, other than maybe being a dedicated stall draft, in the sense that that's all your draft can do, because of basically how easily you can prep for it in the team builder. But when you can bring full Trick Room on a team that's just a regular, everyday draft, that really highlights the beauty of the format. And honestly, this is probably the best example of a successful Trick Room team in the format on just your everyday draft that I've ever seen, or at the very least, it's the best example I've seen in a very long time. So Maddie really went out on a limb right here. He took a pretty big risk. He kind of committed to this idea where he's saying, okay, I'm going to rely on this Trick Room strategy. And by God, it paid off in dividends. So congrats, Matt. Solid match. Definitely deserved this win. And Matt is going to be way up there, top 4 with a 6-3 record.
Right, definitely a very fun game to watch from Maddie and from Bert this week. I definitely do agree that it was one of the most interesting replays from this week. And anytime you win with a team like this, that's got to feel good. Definitely flexing a little bit, saying that he's the best at this game and he will win every time. And if Hack skews the result, then he will offer a restart. So, yeah, there's another Maddie copy pasta. Definitely backing up with this game when you can take a team like this, with a style like this. It's not commonly used to pick up a game in a relatively decisive fashion. So, definitely a good game for Maddie. At number 3, we have Rob Jr.
All right, so this was another game that was a little bit too close for comfort for me. Rob TCG, he always plays himself into a potentially favorable endgame. He always does this, and he always does this pretty well. But he's always riding that line between success and destruction, much like, I guess, Greg, although I feel like Rob is a little bit more consistent. And we kind of see that he might have struggled a lot more this game versus that Empoleon, versus potentially even that Gallade. And Ace is great, don't get me wrong. It always feels like he's riding on that edge. He's riding on the wild side, you know what I'm saying? But honestly, he's one of the most consistently aggressive players we've seen this season. And it's really interesting to see that because you wouldn't necessarily expect that from the draft he built. The draft he built doesn't really scream an offensive draft. He really reminds me a lot of Blake in this sense. But the big difference is that Rob isn't afraid to make those big plays when he has to. And like those big plays that you do kind of have to make that kind of our baggage with the type of play style. So really like getting to see this stuff out of Rob. It's a little bit close for comfort for me, but hey, it is definitely a win, and Rob's record speaks for himself, 6-3.
Right, and Rob started off very dominant in the early season. Had a little shaky midseason, but I'm glad to see him picking up wins here towards the later half of the season. So I hope he continues winning. I hope he really goes decisively into playoffs. He was week 10. He has Gypsy. So I don't know if this game matters at all because I think Gypsy's probably locked number 1 for division, and Rob's probably locked playoffs, and they very might likely meet again in playoffs. So very good season so far from Rob. Very decisive. I like how he's able to continually control the momentum of the game, continually control what's happening, in the sense of he's almost forcing his opponents to do certain things, and he very well knows that. He very well takes advantage of that. And as Mathew says, he's able to play himself into a winning position, very consistently. So definitely great things from Rob. That being said, at number 2 we have Aster.
So we kind of see an atypical game, I guess, for Aster, where he knew kind of going into this that it didn't really impact his playoff chances, and kind of as a result, we don't really see him kind of put his heart into it, I don't think. Now, Aster fans worry not, because I fully expect him to kind of be bringing his A game for the playoffs, which realistically are kind of just around the corner. Unfortunately, he's no longer tied with Gypsy for the high score. Now he's down to a 7-2, which is still a pretty awesome record.
Right, and I'm actually kind of very disappointed in Aster this game. What we saw probably season ending, maybe even career ending, it looked like he reverted back to his GBA form, and I just don't know how he's going to recover from that. Um, I don't know. I think he might be done. He probably should just forfeit his playoff games now. Um, that being said, at number one, we have Gypsy.
All right, so Gypsy, I actually do have something about Gypsy this week, so that's interesting. The Selgor bring was actually very cool. Gypsy, I would say he didn't have the best overall speed tiers this game, so he brought Selgor to ease up that matchup. I think this is like the first time we don't see Gypsy bringing Z Garchomp. After he used the Z move, like after the Selgor, I was a little concerned that it might actually be dead weight, but forcing his opponent's quad resist into Stealth Rocks would actually be perfect for him, obviously because of the weakness and whatnot. And after all that, already down to 59%, and that's when your quad resist is down to 59% after switching into a bug move. You know you're in a pretty decent situation. And the Selgar as well, obviously it was there to, I was always going to be there to prevent the Superior from getting out of hand with or without a sub, which is very, very nice stuff. So honestly, really smart bring this week. Not really, nothing really too crazy, but what we do have to say is there's one more week where someone has an opportunity to beat Gypsy, and if not, then the one person who did beat Gypsy this week has bragging rights of being the only person to beat Gypsy in the regular season. So yeah, that being said, Gypsy is here at an 8-1 score.
Yeah, so David, the only person to beat Gypsy on the season. That's basically where the meme comes from. That if you lose to David, then that means you're good. With that being said, yeah, Gypsy's just doing Gypsy things. His prep's always fantastic. His play's always fantastic. Really no hiccups. Really consistent player. Goes into week 10. I don't know that battle matters at all. Pretty much got playoffs on lock. So definitely very interested to see Gypsy in playoffs. See if he can go for the 4 times straight. So that was our week 9 power rankings. I hope you guys enjoyed. Do you have any final last words?
Best of luck in playoffs, everyone. Good games so we can have fun analyzing it. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time.
Yeah, so definitely looking forward to week 10 where we have some games that matter for relegation and for playoffs. Me personally, I've been rooting for everybody to win. Don't ask me how I'm doing that. I just am. Yeah, so we guys see you guys next week, week 10, where we'll pretty much discuss how the season went, I guess. So yeah, later.